Hey everybody, it's Eric Dreiman, just checking in with the January episode of Hooks and Hoses podcast. Welcome everybody. Hope everybody had a good Christmas and New Year, and looking forward to what 2026 has to offer. This month's guest is retired Chief Anthony Avillo. Um, Chief, welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Great to be on, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have a good conversation. We're going to talk a lot about responding to greater alarm emergencies, particularly fires, and some of the challenges that we encounter with those types of incidents. Before we get into that topic, Chief, tell the audience a little about yourself. Your own, you're a published author. You're well known. You've got your own podcast. So, but for people who maybe aren't as familiar with you as I am, tell them a little bit about you.
Mhm. Well, I spent 30 years in the fire service. Started with the Weehawken Fire Department in New Jersey, which is where the Lincoln Tunnel is. And in 1999, we merged 5 fire departments into one bigger department, North Hudson Regional Fire and Rescue. It's around 350 guys, and we are on the western shore of the Hudson River. So directly across from us is Manhattan, New York City. Um, I retired in 2015. I can't believe I'm like 11 years out, but you're never really out, are you? You
No,
know,
doesn't seem
you
like it.
know. But I have a podcast with Jim Duffy, Fireground Strategies, other stuff from the street, and my fourth edition just came out. So still in the game, I guess.
Yeah, staying active, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
always staying active, man. It's too much in your blood not to. But we'll see. We'll see where this all takes you.
yeah. Yeah, awesome. Well, great. Yeah, you mentioned your department, North Hudson, that you're with now. Um, high high urban density, high population density, right? What's and
Hmm.
you say you're right across from Manhattan, so um, lots of people, lots of in a very small footprint. Um, so tell I know about your department because we've talked before, but a little bit about your department, stations, response area, population served, all that sort of stuff.
Hmm. Well, uh, so we run when we first regionalized. I think we were 14 engines and 6 ladders over 3 battalions. Now
Hmm.
we're 10 engines and 4 ladders over 3 battalions. We have a dedicated safety officer who rides with the Comtech, which is basically my aide. We
Hmm.
have heavy duty rescue. We cover the Hudson River on our side, so we're part of the fireboat task force, which is a North Jersey thing. Again, often doing mutual aid with New York City.
Hmm.
We have, like I said, we have the Lincoln Tunnel jurisdiction. We covering 5 cities. It's about 9 square miles, but it is so densely populated. We never have a fire without two exposure problems. It's
Yeah.
always buildings are either attached or this far apart. If you can touch the walls,
Hmm.
and we'll talk more about that. But I think the the experience that I got there was tremendous because the we never had enough people in Weehawken. We had 10 guys on a shift, 10 guys showing up on a fire ground with the mutual aid coming from the departments would eventually become North Hudson. We were all dispatched out of the same place, which they locally call fire control.
Hmm.
Um, and in 1999, we did the merge. Quite honestly, on our best day in the old departments, we're not better than our worst day in the new department, which is 25 years old now, actually. Going actually 26, going on 27. Um,
Hmm.
it was a great experience, I have to say. I knew what it was like to deal with larger fires on a smaller department, and and being able to really set up a great command structure in a bigger department. We still use mutual aid from Jersey City and Hoboken, and at times we use the task forces from Union County and Essex County, which is where Newark is, and Elizabeth, and at times we get Bergen County coming in. So we still use mutual aid, even though we're relatively big a department. Our response time is great. 3 4 minutes for the first probably 2 3 companies on the scene because it's very very congested there.
Yeah.
It's always rush hour, but we don't do any medical,
Yeah.
which is great because if we did, we'd never be able to do any fires. Because I mean, as you know, there are fire departments with an EMS problem and EMS departments with a fire problem. And we
Yeah.
it would they would have had to do what you guys do with the medic squads, and that was always my suggestion to them. But the ambulances are run by the police departments, which are still individual towns, and
Mhm.
it's all career, and I think that's the best way to do it in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. That's we've talked about this yesterday. But yeah, it's a unique experience or thought concept for me to think about the police department running the EMS. But that's a topic for another, for another show. We're here to talk about big fires, right? So, um, you already mentioned about the incident command, and I kind of knew it was kind of a leading question because although I've never been specifically to the North Hudson area, I know enough about that region of the United States to know just how densely populated it is. I know the building construction fairly well. Like you said, you never just have one structure on fire typically, right? You've always got two exposures at a minimum,
Mhm.
which lends itself to these larger scale incidents because you've got potentially multiple structures going and things. But
Right.
as a chief officer, what are some of the things that you always would be thinking about or planning for in anticipation of these larger events? Or you hear an address come in and you're like, oh crap, this is probably gonna, if this is anything, it's gonna be, you know,
A lot.
I'm gonna need more apparatus. This could potentially turn into, a greater alarm type of
Mhm.
response. Um, were there things that you did over the years to prep yourself or prompt yourself? Obviously, on the job experience helps a lot, but
Mhm.
are there other things that you could maybe share with the audience that you found that helped you either plan for or in the middle of one of these incidents, help manage it?
Well, having the 3 battalions certainly helped. If it was daytime and there was also staff officers down there, staff chiefs, that helped. We we are not shy about striking additional alarms. Almost every working fire, you see fire, heavy smoke, whatever, it's almost a second alarm on arrival. Just because we run 3 guys on an engine, 4 guys on a ladder, we bring probably just like you guys, 4 engines, 2 ladders, rescue, a deputy, a battalion safety officer. That's our first alarm, and then
Hmm.
second alarm would, as soon as we say working fire, we get another battalion chief responding. The RIT responds with the working fire response because our RITs are our squads. So sometimes they're a little further away, never really that further away in the big picture, but a little further away, and we want them on the move right away. So we can always send them back. Um, I always would look at it like, first of all, you know your areas, right? Pre-fire street
Hmm.
intelligence. I know my areas, and I know that, okay, this area here, that this address, there's buildings behind buildings. It's all old wood frame. It's attached or it's unattached, and it's real close. It might as well be attached. Um, and I would always, the nice thing we had is we had initial scene assignments that were, if you were going to break that, you better have a really good reason. We have extremely solid accountability policies where when we decentralize our fire ground. And I would always sort of look at where's my defendable spaces here? Where are the places that we can put people and stuff? I mean, I know, a good bulk of my first alarm is going into the fire building, but
Hmm.
having those additional companies coming in on a first alarm allows me to start to set up my other areas. It was almost very common for us to be using 4 divisions. I'd have a roof division, a fire building division, or we would call the interior division, a Delta and a Bravo. Like, that would be my thinking almost immediately. If I
Hmm.
had a company officer, like I might have a company officer first in an exposure. Well, he's a division commander, but my inclination would always be to get a chief officer there as fast as I can. Eyes on, hands off, rather than on. You know,
Hmm.
I think those things helped us, and I think everybody was basically on the same page with that by us. So across the four shifts, everybody pretty much worked that way, and it allowed us to save a lot of real estate. It's kind of interesting that I think back and yesterday I have my list of jobs, all the fires
Hmm.
that I had been to, and I have notes with everything. Um, the buildings that where we only maybe lost or damaged one building and saved all the exposures probably were more the rule than the exception. We did very, very well with that. Um, and again, I think it was because we had some pre-established sort of philosophies and ideas about this is how we're going to run our fire ground. But I also think it had a lot to do with some great officers, whether company or great firefighters. But I think our discipline and our sort of like one mindset helped us a lot. It helped us a real lot.
Hmm.
So
What expand a little bit on you mentioned that you had the predetermined assignments and roles and things that your department did. We call those standard company functions or order of arrival here.
mhm,
Where I work, but I'm sure they're similar. But just kind of go into that a little bit. I'm a big fan of that. I think that there's a lot of
mhm.
places that they wait they roll up and they have to hit command and ask command. What's my assignment? And I think um, I always try and push that whenever I teach strategy and tactics or company level program somewhere, the importance and the value of having those predetermined assignments. So what were you guys doing in North Hudson and how did you address some of those um,
Well, I think
challenges?
yeah, I think that having those expectations in place was really important. We we don't deal with first due, second due, third due. We deal with first arriving, second arriving, third arriving, which you spoke about, because we're
Mhm.
really company could be off duty. There could be delays in some areas, so the first engine would would always pull past the fire building, and that would be the attack. The second engine would give them a water supply, so we use two engines to do that attack and supply. Sometimes, and a lot of times, you'll hear us say, engine five from engine seven, we're going to bump you. So bumping means the first engine got in the block. They haven't stretched any hose yet, and a lot of times you'll hear that when there's nothing showing. They haven't stretched any hose yet, and before the first ladder got in, the second engine got there. So the second engine would come in the block. They would bump the first engine up to water supply, and then they would go past the building. They'd become attack, and then that
Mhm.
engine would, the supply engine would usually drop and go to the hydrant. But a lot of times, if it's a wider street, which we don't have that luxury all the time, the supply engine will just pass by them, drop the LDH, and go. More times than not, they'll come to a cross street, back down, drop, and go. So that's and we use the first two engines to stretch the first line.
Yeah.
Because we got three companies, we got two pump operators, at least four guys to stretch the first line.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if it's third floor or above, I'll use the third engine to assist in the stretching of the first line. So the first ladder gets the building, the third engine backs down to the ladder, leaving room for the ground ladders. A lot of times, if we know we have a building with a lot of exposures, we will usually try to have a telesquirt back down as that third engine, because so we can use that for exposure protection. And then the fourth engine will sort of sit at the corner, basically the second water supply. So we have a ladder, two
Mhm.
engines this way and two engines that way. All right. Second ladder coming in might be hitting a side street. That will depend. They're usually going to those first five companies are always. Everything else is like, okay, the second engine's arriving. This is where I need you. The rescue would usually bury. The RIT would usually bury.
Mhm.
But the expectations that was set were, it was almost always that way. If they weren't positioning that way, like if we had a different SOP for positioning for a certain building, well, that would be used. But if they weren't positioned that way, they would have to give a pretty good explanation of why they weren't doing that. Because I
Yeah.
always believe, like for me, for initial scene assignments, I need to stay at the strategic level. You know, um,
Mhm.
telling everybody what to do is bringing them down to bringing me to the tactical level, which should be handled by SOPs. And then even
Right.
worse, it's like, and this happens sometimes. They're stretching the line, and I'll see that the line is going under a car tire. I'll just hope that now I'm at the task. But the most important thing for the incident commander, I think, is to stay at the strategic level, or do your best to stay at the strategic level, so that the companies can do the tactical work, with the battalions as the division commanders do the tactical work, and the companies do the task work. I think that sort of levels the playing field for everybody. So I think that worked really well for us. Our water supply was also another issue, which we can talk about.
Mhm.
If you have questions about that, but
Yeah.
we are we started that way in 1999, and we did very little deviation from it up to this day, because it works for us. It works in the streets that we run in.
Yeah. You mentioned something you said that I do want to, and it goes to the water supply statement you made. You talked about your apparatus would, like the bumping, for example, and then I think you said the third engine would back down the street to the ladder. And would they drop a line at the ladder and then lay out to a hydrant somewhere? Was that correct? Or did it just kind of depend?
It would depend, but that engine generally is being used for additional hose lines if needed.
Okay.
That third engine, because the fourth engine now would generally become the supply. Now, if we felt we were going to be using a ladder pipe, um, that would probably be coming, generally, but not always, maybe from a second alarm engine. What they would do is they would drop a manifold, and the manifold then would be maybe hand jacked in to near the ladder, and that engine would go to another water supply, maybe on a side street.
Yeah.
We've gone, I've 5, 6 water supplies on big fires. And I think I'm thinking one of the fires we had 6 water supplies on 5 different mains. 4 of them were being done with manifolds.
Yeah.
If that's what you guys call them, the manifolds are
Yeah.
part of hydrant things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it'll depend.
Mhm.
That fourth engine could feed the telesquirt, which is then being used for exposure protection. Um, we generally don't go to ladder pipe right away. We're trying to knock the fire down with the first companies. But we will sometimes go to that third engine, whether it's a telesquirt or an engine with a deck gun, to start using the exposure lines. Quite honestly, by us, our second line oftentimes is an exposure line.
Mhm.
We'll throw it into the alley. I was a very big fan of, and it didn't happen. We don't use pre-connects. We stretch everything off the back because we have walk-ups, and pre-connects, they don't work for us. But I
Right.
thought our pre-connect should have been 2.5s, 200 feet, boom, right off the rig, right to the alley. There's your exposure line. We don't got to pull it. We don't got to break it. We go boom, right in the alley. But it kind of never happened. When I was acting chief of department, that was the spec I wanted for all the new rigs coming in, but it never happened. So again, the exposure line is generally the second line most of the time, but
Mhm.
it's usually stretched off the back. You
Yeah.
know,
How did you, I know just putting a pumper on a hydrant versus just hooking to the hose to the hydrant and laying in and pumping that way is one way, but to get better water. But talk about your water system. If you when you had challenges, or how did you try to minimize, Peter, Rob, and Paul, one
Mhm.
engine stealing another engine's water and pumps running away from one another and all that typical stuff that happens at these, or not typical, but that can happen at these larger incidents. What were some of the ways that you guys found that, or you've developed over your career to help with that, manage
Well,
that a
our
little bit?
our hydrant system is really good. So North Hudson sits on the top of like a plateau, sort of. On the east side is the real steep cliffs lead down to the waterfront where the Hudson River is. On the west side are hills that are in North Bergen is the second hilliest place in America next to San Francisco. So we got
Uh,
buildings with railings on them. And that leads down to like the Meadowlands, out where Giant Stadium is, which is not our jurisdiction. So we have very good water on those lower ends, okay, but we still have really good water up on the top ends. There are some areas not so great, um, but as I said, We utilize those manifolds a lot. We very rarely tap. We very rarely tap more than two hydrants on the same main. You know, if it's a really big main, we will.
Hmm.
But there are times that we won't. We had one of my last jobs, big jobs, was in this big apartment building up at north end of the region, and didn't realize up there, and shame on me, that there were only 6-inch mains up there. That was just up on like 90th Street. If you go north of 60th Street in North Bergen on Kennedy Boulevard, there's 6-inch mains, and I kind of knew, I didn't know, and whatever. But everything we were tapping into, all the ladder pipes were doing this. So
Yeah.
we actually had Jersey City on mutual aid. We had them drop a manifold and have a 2-engine relay all the way down to this street called Bergen Line Avenue that we knew had 36-inch mains. And we established a water supply down there. We also established two water supplies up into Bergen County. They sent us a sort of water supply task force, basically. And we sent
Hmm.
two water supplies up into Bergen County just to get more water, because I believe we had three, maybe four ladder pipes going there. Um, And that another incident we had at the bottom of the cliffs, the Rock Harbor complex. I had two multiple alarm fires in there. Um, they're dead end hydrants that go to the river, but they're really good hydrants because they're at the bottom of the cliffs. But at the second fire, one of them had been damaged by Hurricane Sandy and never was fixed, and we were never told about it. Again, shame on us. Um,
Hmm.
so we started to sort of, the water got a little cagey there, a little weird. But what we did is we knew out on River Road, which was about 1,000 feet away, we had, I believe, they're 36 or 48-inch mains because they're pretty new, and we did like two big relays out to those mains, which we had like 150 firefighters on scene. I very rarely set up a water supply officer, but I did that day because I wanted that off my plate. I said, look, get this water supply out to River Road and get the water in there, and
Hmm.
that worked very, very well. So I think the thing is, our expectations set are, if you're a second alarm engine coming in, be prepared to establish a third water supply. A fourth alarm, be prepared to establish a fourth alarm water supply. Our companies don't ask us what we want them to do. They'll run in silent, they'll stage uncommitted, tell us they're on the scene. But there would be times when I would call fire control, and I would say, who do I have on my third alarm, or who do I have on my fourth alarm? And they would say, well, you got engine 7, engine 5, and ladder 3 with battalion 2. I'd say, okay, have engine 7 drop a manifold at the corner of 22nd and Bergen Line and grab a hydrant on Bergen Line. And then the next alarm coming in, I might have them drop a manifold on 24th and Bergen Line, and because all of the mains run this way, or
Yeah.
I knew the grid pretty well, especially down in lower areas where I was originally a firefighter, and not having enough water um, it's not a common problem for us. There are times that it will be, but
Hmm.
we know where our big mains are, and while it will take a little time, we'll eventually get what we need. And there are times too. Only two times in my career I saw us draft out of the Hudson River. So or draft and I don't think they ever drafted out off of our fireboat. But I don't know because I've been gone for
Yeah.
a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Do you ever, so you never had to um, call the water company and tell them, hey, can you boost the pressure on the grid in this area? Or do you even have
Yeah,
those
we have.
options? Or you have before? I
Yeah,
know
we
that's,
have.
yeah,
It's rare though. It's rare,
yeah,
and we routinely have our even when nothing's showing, whatever the water supply engine is, they're required to open the hydrant and flush it. Make sure it runs. Not in the winter, of course, but make sure they got
yeah,
water in that hydrant. And that saves us a lot of heartache because we've had bad hydrants at times. I'm
yeah,
sure you know that.
yeah.
Oh,
Bad hydrants, frozen hydrants,
yeah.
Murphy's always going to show up.
See, how many guys are on Indy?
1,350 is
Yeah. See,
what we're
so
rostered at. Yeah,
you're 1,000 more than us. It's a little easier to manage and control 350 guys through your SOPs than it is to manage 13. Plus, you guys have all the ring cities and everything right?
Mm.
Those ring, you just keep eating up areas, and
Yeah.
to me, that was like regionalization. There was a time, there was a gestation period where, we got to strangle this beast and get it, get it to work for us through the talents of all the people. But, we all better be on the same page because
Yeah.
by us, fires spread too fast. We, with the exposure problems and everything, they just spread too fast. We can't afford not to have everybody on the same page.
Hmm. Yeah, we do a pretty good job of that here with our order of arrival and those sorts of things. So, um, but I think you've had the opportunity to, what'd you say, go to 400 multiple alarm fires in your career. I think you told me yesterday when we were talking, or
Now
somewhere in
it's
there.
more like 250, something like that.
Okay.
I commanded close to 100 of them.
Yeah, and that's still a lot, and and that's the thing that I think, and part of the reason I wanted to talk about this with you is because of your experience, and then I think it's also it's challenging, certainly
Mhm.
whether you work at a smaller department or you work at a larger department. Um, I think that people tend to take the residential mentality and the residential
Mm.
mindset and try and apply it to one of these incidents, and it doesn't work out well for them. Um, they don't come into the fronting into some of these runs. You don't go into it with the idea that we're not going to be able to put this out with an inch and 3/4 hand line or 2 inch three
Mhm.
quarter hand lines, right? It's
Yeah.
and some ground ladders. You've got to come into these things, and it's hard. I'm not going to say it's always easy, but you've got to be thinking about it and you've got to be working on it. You can't just be thinking about what's happening when you roll up. You've got to be thinking about 10, 15, 20 minutes down the road,
Mhm.
which is kind of what
Mhm.
guys like you and me are doing, right? That's why we're getting paid what we're getting paid, and why we show up is we're forecasting, we're planning, we're trying
Mhm.
to do the big picture stuff. But I think that's important for even for company officers to be thinking about those things and not just, even though they're task saturated in many cases and they've got their roles that they have to do. It's still important for them to be thinking about, hey, is this really the best place for the engine 10 minutes from now, or is this the best
Mhm.
place for me to park this aerial apparatus 20 minutes from now? Because that, just because that's where the fire is doesn't mean it's where it's going to be. So you've got to be thinking ahead. And I think that sometimes with these types of runs, unfortunately, that's where we get behind the eight ball. I think people aren't.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the best compliments I ever got, and it wasn't to my face. They told my brother, they said, the one thing that separated you from really most of the other chiefs, and we had great chiefs. They said, well, you were always 5 or 6 steps ahead of the fire. That you are always
Mhm.
ahead of you, always thinking further out. And I think the reason I was able to do that was because I had extremely good chiefs that were at the tactical level. Everybody was at their level. Although we train them to think above their level. You're a company officer. You got to be thinking a little bit like a chief officer because you may be a division commander for a little while. You're a
Mhm.
battalion, you're going to be an incident commander until I get there. So I think you need to sort of be able to step up your game into the next sort of level a little bit. But I also think as a strategic thinker, we also have to remember the other ones. I got to be also thinking tactical and task because these are things that um, it's where I came from. You know,
Yeah.
one of the criticism I did get in my book from somebody was, you're talking too much tactical and task. You're doing strategy, great, but this is a strategy book. Why are you talking tactics and tasks? And I'm like, well, how do you not talk tactics and
Yeah.
tasks? Mostly tactics, so often tasks, but how do you not talk about that when you're talking strategy? Like they all
Yeah.
interconnect. Like so. I don't know. And the other thing is we don't command from inside the car. We command from street. We're in the street. I got two-sided view of the building. I'm sometimes getting hit with the ladder pipe water. Like it's the way it
Yeah.
is. It was the way I worked it because I don't feel First of all, and this is where me and Castros always go back and forth, and I love the guy. I was telling you nothing more than a glorified dispatcher down a block in a car. Vince Lombardi never coached the game from the locker room, you know.
Yeah,
So that's always been our philosophy as well, in North Hudson and most of the East Coast, I think.
yeah. No, that's my personal preference, and that's when I go to any kind of incident. Very rarely will I ever stay in the buggy. I'm
Mm,
up. I want to see, and I understand the thought process behind the sterile environment with fewer distractions. You can focus and concentrate on what's going on. But I think I also think that there's a certain element that you miss not being there, being able to physically see the building, being able to
yeah,
listen and smell and there's a lot more that goes into it from a sensory perspective, at least in my mind,
I
um,
agree.
that that you benefit from. Um,
Yeah,
when
I
you
agree. You have your five senses, including common sense. Why would you eliminate one of them when
Yeah,
you're the guy ultimately in charge of the incident?
yeah, yeah, I agree. I know you've been out of like I said, you retired in 2015. So, um, but you're also still a student of the game. So I'm sure you have an opinion on this, and not only that, but your firsthand experience. Um, what kind of technology or equipment were you using as an incident commander when you were running fires? Were you using, a command table in the street? Were you using a iPad, laptop, legal pad and an ink pen? How did you normally track and manage resources
Mhm.
and do those sorts of things back then? And what's your opinion about some of the options that today's folks have, particularly for these larger incidents?
Hmm. Well, when I was in Weehawken, it was just a dry erase marker in the hood of the car sometimes, and sometimes it
Yeah.
wasn't a dry erase marker. um, but as we went forward in North Hudson, I could tell you that the Comtech, my aide,
Hmm.
was worth its weight in gold. Like there was a point when the department was saying, "Well, maybe we're going to cut the aid," and we were like, "There's no way you can cut the aid. There is no way." So we have a couple of different things. We have on a one alarm fire, like one alarm incident. They bring out this just little blackboard. It's like a whiteboard, and they'll write on that. As soon as we go to second alarm, the big board comes out, and they'll use the whiteboard just to kind of lay all that stuff back out on the whiteboard, with the magnets and the
Hmm.
diagrams. I also am a big fan, and I only kind of got into it towards the end of my career, um, of using Google Maps or whatever. I mean, I know we got them in the rigs, but
Hmm.
at the command post, at one point I had a tough book, and I would just tap in the address, and bang, I'd have that view of the building from the top. So what happened with the tough book was a ladder pipe hit it. It wasn't so tough. So I just used my phone, and I
Yeah.
would just type in the address, and I would see you know an overhead view of the building. That helped me tremendously, and
Yeah.
I know it's beyond that now. I mean, like, what New York City uses with the BIC cards and all that stuff. Like I had a lot of that stuff at my fingertips, but there were times I had to look things up, and um, uh, but the other thing that I didn't do back then that I would do now is I would keep a ticket at the command post now. I never did it, but I had
Mhm.
taken some classes, and you know, I could take my tick and I could look and I could tell maybe it's a balloon frame and I could see the fire running the walls. Maybe I could see it running a cop loft.
Mhm.
Maybe I could look behind the door and where there's not a lot of smoke but there's a lot of heat. The tick is going to tell me that, whereas my eyes may be deceiving me.
Mhm.
So that if I had that, if I was still an incident commander, I'd have a tick at the command post.
Mhm.
We also have pack trackers, which I thought was an outstanding piece of equipment. We at the FDIC, back when we were doing truck company search, we field tested it for Scott, and we couldn't
Mhm.
fool it. But Scott showed us exactly how to use it, and I think what happens is there are too many departments that have them that don't rely on them because they don't use them properly. you have to scan while you're stationary. You can't
Hmm.
walk and scan, it doesn't work. But a lot
Yeah.
of people realize that and they say, oh, this thing doesn't work. I'll tell you what, we couldn't fool the thing. We used to go and play to train with it. We'd play hide and seek in a huge warehouse. And that's
Yeah.
what we would find them,
Yeah.
and really good stuff. I know a lot of departments have the back of the car where you lift the car and you have everything in there, which is
Yeah.
cool as long as you can get the car somewhere near the front of the building where you can see the building. I think that's really good. I'm not against a lot of the stuff that's out there now. What I don't like is someone sitting in the car down the block because you're not using all your senses. In
Hmm.
fact, why not even be using common sense at that point? Because common sense says use your five senses at the front of the building. Um,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of great stuff. We don't have drones in North Hudson yet. I don't think they do. I think the police departments. That's a great resource. And as time goes on, those drones are getting more and more useful for
Hmm.
certain things. And I don't know if it's AI, but I saw drones being used. Over in the Middle East, not in the Middle East, in China and places like that, where they're actually attached to hose lines. And I mean, listen,
Yeah.
you use a drone is like a mini helicopter with 500 gallons of water on it and just tame a high-rise fire. I mean, I'm sure that's being done and that's being developed, and maybe some departments have it. But yeah, no, I think technology in the fire service is great. Some stuff is good, some stuff is not. You got to field test everything, and once you have it, you got to train, use SOPs, maintain it. I mean, everybody's got to know about it. Uh, but yeah, no, I'm not against that. But I worked in the primitive, which I'm sure you did too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the drones are relatively new. I mean, we've had them for probably 6, 8 years, maybe longer than that, but let's go with 6 or 8 years. And I was never opposed to them, but I saw them more as a search and rescue, urban search and rescue, water recovery kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, Man, they're phenomenal. I've had been on a few extra alarm fires with them, and one in particular, we had a church fire, and uh, the drone had thermal imager capability on it, and it was smoky fire, so the guys running the aerial streams they didn't have a lot of visibility. They needed, generally they were throwing water in the right direction, but to fly that drone over the top of that church, and I could see the stream and I could see the fire, and I could tell those guys, move your stream 10 feet to the left, move it down or whatever. And
Hmm.
that stuff's it's just crazy. What you can do nowadays with those drones. I wouldn't say pull them out on every incident, but they certainly have their place. They're
Yeah,
great.
yeah, no, I completely agree with that, man. Especially for checking on fire extension and things like that, and checking in areas that we can't put people, like on a lightweight truss
Yeah,
roof.
yeah.
Look, a lot of fire under that roof, or it's moving towards the delta exposure, and um, these guys got fire above their heads, and they might not even know it.
Hmm.
So, I think it's real valuable. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely,
yeah. They
definitely.
sure are. Uh, we talked earlier about apparatus placement and some of the challenges with that, and I know that we did talk about the your order of arrival and who does what and how you guys come into an incident. Um, you have any tips or tricks or recommendations for apparatus placement and things that folks can do? I know you said you have a lot of narrow streets and um, just challenges that apparatus placement have created in your career. First person experiences, story that you could pass along that um, would drive home the importance of apparatus placement and not just everybody piling in like a lot of people do and things like that.
Right. Well, I think communication is a huge part of it. Communication and SOPs, huge part of it. Um, One of the things that we would do, also sometimes we got to bring the rig into the street, and the guys got to get out, and they got to guide the rig into the street, where the jack's got to go.
Mm.
How do you raise the aerial if there's a car right next to it? You got to move the rig so that the jacks are in between the cars. Otherwise you can't get the jacks out. We short jack all the time. Because it's just the way that we operate. Wires is another problem. We have wires everywhere. So, there are times we can't even use the aerial, and we may, if it's an attached building, use the aerial on one of the side streets. And the aerial would go up there where there are no wires, and the guys would be able to work their way across the roof. Of course, watching out for shafts and things like that. And that's where, again, having this would say, okay, you guys are coming from the 24th Street corner. Okay, be aware. You got shafts on the Charlie side of these buildings, open shafts, or you have diamond shafts in between in the center, things like that. Just be careful. Um,
Hmm.
we back down a lot with our engine companies. Uh, One of the cardinal things is never back a rig down without spotters. You know, Always make sure that you're more than far enough away that they can get the ground ladders out the back of the aerial. Because I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many times that I hear about that. I've seen it, and that's the responsibility of the company officer of that engine, and not necessarily the driver, company officer, and to make sure his firefighters are out there and they got the room to get the ground ladders out. But we
Hmm.
back everything up, and we use lights very very well. Let me think what else. We Yeah, we try not to clog up the block. That's the most important thing for us. Don't clog up the block. Give everybody the opportunity to drop and go, you know,
Hmm.
and make sure the ladder gets the building. That's
Yeah.
for us. I know there are a lot of departments down where I live here in Monmouth County and where I used to teach up in Bergen County. A lot of departments, the ladder don't get the front of the building, and maybe it's because the building's way set back, or it's a one-story building. Like, listen, we don't have private dwellings in North Hudson. All we have are big ass 2.5 story frames for the most part that now have 5 families in them, and they're all
Yeah.
chopped up. So we don't have that, thing. So by us, almost every fire is a multiple dwelling fire. Almost everyone, every single one of them.
Hmm.
And so we have to make sure that we can get enough equipment in there, and we don't block corners, things like that. Blocking a corner is always bad because now it
Hmm.
eliminates your flexibility with your apparatus. And as you have multiple alarm companies coming in, and we don't generally do, oh, the staging area is over here. We Once in a while we'll do that, but very rarely we do that. Our companies know, don't impede the access to the scene, don't impede the traffic, coming in and out. If we got to get an ambulance in there fast or out, something like that, don't impede that. So and we're pretty good at that along the way. And quite honestly, so are the police departments. We've had enough run ins with them that they pretty much get it in regard to that. I know that's a big problem around the country.
Yeah.
Um, but we kind of, our bread and butter for us are the multiple dwellings, attached buildings, things. That's our bread and butter, But again, like when you're dealing with, the buildings that change the rules, we have warehouses, we have tons of high rises, we have the Lincoln Tunnel, we have
Hmm.
big old factories. We got places, all kinds of condos and lightweight construction, all those new ground scrapers. I call them human storage units. We have all that as well, and you can't fight those fires the same way that you fight those legacy buildings. And we have to make sure, whether it's apparatus positioning or just your strategy and tactics that you use, we have to make sure that we're adjusting to the building,
Yeah.
which is important, um,
Hmm.
and I think that's going to be our biggest problem moving forward. Or it's our biggest problem right now moving forward is not being able to adjust to a structure that changes the rules of the game. You know, we don't dictate to the buildings dictate to us. And we have to work within the parameters of what the building's allowing us to do. We can't
Yeah.
force um, a strategy and a tactic of an older building onto a newer building. It
Hmm.
doesn't it doesn't always work. If it does, we got lucky. You
Yeah.
know, we got lucky. And we've seen that all over the country. You know, People
Yeah.
using private dwelling, ranch tactics and strategies in large area buildings and paying prices for it. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
you look at the Lieb and Goldfeder book, the 30 Fires You Must Know About. I'm going to say probably out of those 30 fires, maybe 20 of them were buildings that, were not, the bread and butter 1 story buildings, and we, those tactics got us in trouble, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we need to recognize that. I think that's important. And that goes for everything from tactics to apparatus positioning to, command structure, you know?
What do you think about? I know, we most firefighters want to consider themselves. Most fire departments want to consider themselves aggressive, and I think that's something to to aspire for. I think that's good. These larger scale incidents, though, not that they're a hazmat run or they're a rope run where you've got to really slow down and think about what you're doing, but I think we would do ourselves a favor sometimes on these runs, particularly when we roll in with we've already got a significant fire that we're addressing. Maybe taking a few, taking a deep breath and saying, okay, let's think about what we're doing here with this engine. Let's think about what we're doing here with this truck company. Where am I going to position things rather than just everybody doing, like you said, what they do for 99% of the fires they go to, which is, residential. Um, I think people, a lot more fire scenes would be better managed if folks just took a couple of extra seconds and really thought out where they were
Mm,
laying from, where they were going to park their apparatus. Because we get away with stuff a lot of times, and then that becomes through normalization of deviance. That becomes the default. But these bigger incidents like this, these are where where those weak points are going to show themselves. Um,
yeah, yeah.
I
Um,
just think, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, listen, Jim Duffy come up with a term educated aggression. you
Yeah.
know work within the parameters that the building sets for you. It doesn't mean you don't have to be can't be aggressive, but you have to understand the building. I also think it goes back to pre-fire street intelligence companies. We don't What do we Indianapolis, and same with us, you probably pre-plan less than 2% of the buildings, you know but the
Mhm.
fires are in the other 98% of the buildings. So you have to know your district, have to know your area, have to know all the idiosyncrasies of what that area is. Those company offices need to be experts in their area. That was the beauty of regionalization for me, because I came out of Weehawken. I mean, I knew the other towns. I lived in North Bergen my whole life, but these guys knew their areas, you know.
Mhm.
So if I had questions, I knew who to ask, because I didn't know. Eventually I did, but you need those company officers to become experts in their areas, and the battalion chiefs to become experts in their areas, because, a place like Indianapolis, I mean, you're like a sort of a division commander there.
Mhm. It's a
Yeah.
battalion.
So
Yeah.
so you generally have your area, but you can wind up in another area, and hoping that the people there have some intelligence for you that you're going to be able to use in your strategic approach to these buildings. And I mean, it's a whole big ball of like information that everybody has responsibility for. By the way, I just reread your article this morning. That was an excellent article, man. And
Thank you.
you talk about
Thanks.
aggression and things like that, and
Yeah.
you know um listen, there are victims in the building until we prove there are not. And that's how you have to operate. But that being said, we also have to fight the fire. So there's that. You always are looking for that two-prong attack, going after the people and going after the fire. you know Not every department can do that. You guys can, we
No.
can. A lot of
Yeah.
departments can't do that.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. It's a
It
challenge.
is.
Do you have
Yeah.
areas where a company might arrive on the scene and be there for a while by themselves? I
Yes.
figured that, out in the outskirts, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
What challenges do they have with that?
Yeah.
Is that addressed?
Yeah. They've got, that's saturate or task saturation is what I call it. But,
Hmm.
I tell people there's times when we can do, and most of the time we can do multiple tasks simultaneously because of our staffing. But there are going and this translates, and I use it a lot when I teach at departments, smaller departments, combination volunteer departments that don't have the staffing that other places do. Is the same thing still have to be done, and I'm a big fan of Recio. Um,
Hmm.
all those things in Recio are pretty much going to happen at every fire, right?
Right.
Whether they happen simultaneously or sequentially, depends upon your staffing level, but they still have to be done. So, that's how from a tactical and a strategic standpoint, that's to me, that's kind of how you have to address some of those things that, and you kind of alluded to it when you talked about the building gets a vote. I always say there's three votes at every fire: the building, the fire, and the fire department, right? We all three get a vote, and no single vote can really outvote the other one. So we've all got to kind of play together and solve this problem. Um, but yeah, you know, we do have areas where it's going to be challenging for folks. But again, having those conversations ahead of time,
Mm.
um, not only between company officers and battalion chiefs, but company officers and their people. Hey, we go here. This is what we're going to do. This particular building is going to create these kinds of challenges. And like you said, knowing your first due area um, is very important, and that's going to pay dividends back to you uh, when it's a high stress environment. You know where plugs are, where where the FDC is, or where the different stairwells are, building
Mhm.
construction types, all those different things. That's when they're going to pay dividends. Is that mundane or boring work that as some people look at it up front is going to save you a lot when it counts. So
That's an interesting analogy. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about a chessboard. But you're playing against two different people, right? You're playing the building, you're playing the fire, and you have
mhm.
to watch both their moves and make your moves. You know,
Yeah,
so it's almost like you only got one piece, and it's two pieces you're playing against,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, I like that analogy. That's pretty good.
yeah. Well, we're coming up on an hour. What else you got? You got some nuggets, some tidbits, based on some of your experiences over the years, things that
Um,
maybe we didn't cover that you'd like to throw out.
well, there's one thing that I was thinking about as we were talking. It's about perspective. You know, the perspective of the incident commander, the perspective of the tactical, the division commanders, perspective of firefighters. We had a fire, and I told you about this large apartment building on the north end, and
Hmm.
it started in the cock loft, but it never burned through the roof. It started in the cell phone equipment, and it pressurized all the way down to the third floor. And we got a call for a smoking outlet. And when we got on the scene, they pulled the outlet from the third floor, and the smoke poured out of it. And we had open doors and stuff, of course, and they noticed there was smoke coming from the light fixtures, the door frames on the third floor. This was a 5-story building, and at that point, it started puffing out of the cock loft. This is about when I got there, so
Hmm.
it had a really, really big head start. Um, and the lesson I learned there that I took away from it was that the perspective of the incident commander as the incident ages from the exterior is oftentimes a lot more accurate than what's happening on the interior. We're going to balance those things, of course.
Hmm.
But if you pull up on the scene as a company officer and you see two windows showing fire, and now you're in that building and you're working in there and you're there for, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and the IC starts calling you out. He's calling you out for a reason because he sees something you don't see. In your head, you still only see two windows showing fire. But when you come out of the building, you might have two floors showing fire now. And I think people inside the building have to realize that because they see what they see, and I'm going to balance that. I'm going to balance those reports, right, from the interior, exterior. But from the outside, I can read smoke, I can see fire, I can see exposures, I can see building compromise, I can see more than them whether we're making a dent in this thing. So I think my perspective is as the incident ages, a lot more accurate. And what happened at this fire is I could see them hitting fire in a cockloft, because they said everywhere they pulled ceilings there was fire. The guys on the roof, they were walking on the roof with the pike pole. The pike pole went right inside it went right in the roof, and the roof opened up in fire. Luckily they were sounding the roof, or they would have been went into the roof. But I
Yeah.
could see them hitting fire. But I could also see, and we were in this building almost an hour, but good old ordinary construction,
Hmm.
but I could see fire breaking out in all these other areas, so I had to pull everybody out. And when I pulled everybody out, my senior captain, who was on the company with that line, said, didn't you see us hitting that fire in the cockpit? I think we were starting to get a handle on this. And he was looking at me with the building at his back. And I said, do you see what the conditions are? And he turns around and he looks and he sees the fire coming out of all these other areas. He goes, oh, he goes, good call, man. So from that, that was the
Yeah.
lesson I learned, and I brought it forth in the critique, and I taught at North Hudson in September. I taught all 4 shifts, and I covered that. And the other thing with that building is we were in that building a long time. They renovated that building. Now it has laminated wooden I beams for roof supports. And the last day on the job, or one of the last day on the job, I sent that out to everybody. I took a picture, sent it out. Now, 10 years later, nobody knew about it. And I said, if you were on this roof an hour ago before this class and there was a fire on the top floor, what would have happened here? And they were like, we all would have fell into the roof. This roof would have collapsed under us. So we used to use a thing called it's sort of called the building memo, the weird building report. And anybody
Yeah.
could do it, take pictures, a little bit of literature, send it to headquarters. Headquarters would put it out. But they stopped doing it. And after I finished teaching there, they picked it up again. And now the
Good.
battalion chief in charge of it is completely overwhelmed by all of the things that are being sent to him,
Yeah.
because now, and I told him, look, it's pre-fire street intelligence. Because we don't
Yeah.
pre-plan these buildings, but you need to know about them, and that was a lesson I learned. If the IC tells you to get out, it's because he sees something or something's being seen from an area you're not in. So what it means when you're told to get out, that means get out. Don't tell me 5 minutes. Don't tell me 30 seconds. Get out of the building.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, is real important. It was from the last major fire that I had was the lesson that I learned at that fire.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a very good um, point to pass along because I've been on both sides of that
of
that
course, so
coin over my career. So
why are we
I
being
can
closed
I
out?
I can appreciate it, being the guy that was had his back to the building and the battalion chief told me to get out and then now being in the role of the battalion chief. Yeah, so that's pretty that hits home for me. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, for a lot of
Um,
people,
yeah, yeah,
and it hit
yeah,
home for me. So
yeah,
all good.
yeah. Well, Chief, how can people get a hold of you if they want to get a copy of your book? They want to have you out to do a presentation. They want to learn more about you. What's the
Oh,
what is
okay.
I know you've got
Well,
a. I mean, I know this, but for the audience, you've got a website, you've got email, obviously, and that
yeah,
sort of stuff. So,
thank you so much. I have a website, chiefavillo.com. All my information is there. All the classes that I teach are there, and my email is there. It's avillo deputy1 at gmail with the number one instead of ONE at gmail.com. Yeah, I love to come out and I love to teach. I love to see the country and see the differences in the fire departments, and because everyone's a little bit different. They have their challenges, and you just try and help. You just try
mhm.
and help. And the book is available, Fireground Strategies, fourth edition. It's available from Amazon. It's available from Fire Engineering Books. Anyway, you can get a book. It's available. That's the cover. You can see it well. The Abbey Road cover.
I was going
Um,
to say it's a Beatles throwback
yeah, yeah, isn't that
on.
cool?
Yeah,
I couldn't believe they let me do it, but
yeah,
Diane didn't really like it, and she was like, "There's no way." And David broke her down, and and thank you, Diane, thank you, David, and the people that were there said it was the coolest cover they ever did.
yeah,
So I'm very thankful to them and for everybody that just supports like my mental meanderings and thinking, and I'm just glad that I'm able to pass some things on, you know
yeah.
because the job
Well,
was good for me.
yeah. Well, I appreciate it because I know talks like this are what make the fire service better. So, and
Hmm.
having you on will add a little bit more to that, hopefully, for somebody down the road.
Yeah, I hope so, man. I hope so, and
Yeah,
don't forget to have fun.
absolutely. That's the
you know
biggest part, biggest point too, right? Well, Chief, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, we had a little snafu yesterday. My internet was acting wonky, so that's
Hmm.
why I'm doing the podcast today from my office at the firehouse. But we made it happen. We worked it out. We got it done. So um,
Thanks,
thanks
buddy.
again, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks to Chief Anthony Avillo. Check out um, his podcast. Do you want to plug that again real quick?
Yeah, it's Fireground Strategies and other stuff from the street with Jim Duffy, who's a much better talker than I am, and he's a chief from Connecticut. It runs, I believe, every second Saturday. So we just filmed it last night. So all good. And my other book, Full Contact Leadership, is out there, and I'm very proud of that because I was able to write that with my mentor Ed Flood, who's not with us anymore.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you,
On
Chief.
behalf, so for those that haven't signed up or registered for FDIC 2026 yet, I can't forget to bring that up. I know the hot classes are going to be sold out. They've added quite a few more workshops this year. I know the goal is to maybe expand some of the hot classes a little bit moving forward, but nevertheless, those things always sell out. So don't wait till the last minute to register for FDIC. Get your departments signed up and and get that knocked out sooner rather than later, or you're going to miss out again. So again, thanks on behalf of Fire Engineering. Myself, Eric Dreiman, Chief Avillo. Appreciate you all tuning into the Hooks and Hoses podcast, and we'll see you in